Welcome everybody, I'm Santiago Neeland and this is The Divine Within, the invisible connection with God. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the long way home. So in every spiritual journey, we have a beginning. It begins somewhere. For some, it's in certainty. For others, it's in doubt. Today's story begins with a little boy who walked out of the church, convinced he could never believe in the God he had just heard about. Our guest is J.J. Johnson, author, former U.S. State Department Foreign Service Specialist, past president of the Grand Canyon Urantia Book Society, and lifelong student of the Urantia Book. Throughout a distinguished career with the U.S. State Department, serving in diplomatic assignments from Islamabad and Moscow to Beijing and Washington, J.J. discovered that the greatest journey wasn't across continents, but within. Because sometimes the longest road is the one that finally brings us home. So welcome, J.J. It's a pleasure having you here.
Santiago, well, thank you so much for having me, and it's great to be with you and your listeners.
Thanks a lot. And it's an interesting topic, and I want to get right to it because we have an interesting story of a life story. So let's begin with the first segment. So the boy who walked out. For every seeker's story has a beginning. And for JJ, it started with fear, a childhood experience that caused him to reject religion before he could truly understand God. But sometimes walking away is simply the first step towards discovering a deeper truth. So tell us, JJ, in this explanation that you're going to give us about the long way home, what was your personal experience in this walking out of your church?
Well, Santiago, that's an excellent place to start. Thanks for bringing it up in that manner. Well, I guess I could say I didn't walk out of the church. I ran out of the church at 5 years old. And so it was more like I scared the living daylights out of me. I was born in Kentucky, and I grew up the first few years on my grandparents' farm, Mama and Papa, I called them, and they had a tabernacle. They had a church on their property. And so the priest or the itinerant preacher would come once a week and give a sermon at the church. Of course, it was the fire and brimstone, the scary stuff. And at 5 years old, you can only imagine. But it's amazing, Santiago. At 5 years old, like I said, it scared the daylights out of me. And one of the sermons, I just ran out of the church and went out into this open field and spread my legs at 5 years old. I say 5 years old because they didn't have kindergarten in those days back in the early 50s in Kentucky. So I'm pretty sure I was 5 years old. But I spread my legs and I had to make this affirmation. I was sincere as a heartbeat. And I spread my legs because I thought I was going to get hit by a bolt of lightning. But I had to say it. I had to say it. I can't believe in God. And so, of course, looking back on it and after my spiritual experiences later on in life, which I'll get into, if that's what God was all about, I really didn't care to have any part of that. It disturbed my inner peace. And so because of that, Santiago, I was, I guess you could say the best description was I was an agnostic. I wasn't an atheist. I mean, who am I to say there's no God? I just didn't know, and I wanted proof. I couldn't have living faith like a lot of people have, and it's real. Living faith motivates people. You can tell the fruits they bear, and it's a real thing. But I for some reason, my makeup or whatever it was, I wanted proof. I wanted some sort of an experience, a personal experience. And I knew if there was a God, it had to be a loving Heavenly Father. And sooner or later, God will give me whatever experience I needed to confirm that. I never really gave it much thought after that in the beginning because I left it at that. And I didn't, so it wouldn't disturb my inner peace. But there was a void there. There was a spiritual void. So jumping ahead, I went from 5 years old till I was 22 out of the Marines. I was in the Marines for 4 years. And when I got out of the Marines, I was back in Chicago area and still had that inner peace, but I had no spiritual attachment to it. So there was, it left me searching because it didn't fill the complete void. And sure enough, Santiago, when I was 22, I had my spiritual experience. I guess you could call it born again, spiritual transformation, whatever way someone identifies with that. And I could go in and talk of the logistics of where I was at and everything illuminated around me. There was this loving presence, a loving presence that manifested itself. It was real. And this presence, this love, it's almost a contradiction in terms, Santiago. This loving presence it's hard to say it, but it got more loving. I didn't have to go, gee, give me more proof, but for some reason, I can't describe it in words. But this loving presence communicated to me, not in words, but it communicated that achieved the same purpose, but it was more pure, that there's a loving Heavenly Father. So finally, at 22, for the first time in my life, I was able to make spiritual decisions, or decisions of a spiritual nature. Because when I loved hearing about Christians and people that had, they were on fire, and I just
Yeah.
loved listening to them. But I just sat there like this, didn't do anything for me other than appreciating their story. But
Yeah. Yeah.
after my spiritual experience, transformed by whatever spiritual transformation, whatever way people want to describe it, finally I was able to draw upon insight to make decisions for myself. So then I was on track. I knew there was a
Okay.
loving Heavenly Father. I had a personal spiritual experience that validated it for me. And so at 22, I was still searching. I didn't have the details. I mean, where are we going to go after we die, if
But you
anywhere?
had this experience, all right? You had a starting point. I mean, and I'm going to ask you a lot of questions, but just to clear this up, you had this experience, but now you had the will and the volition to seek this spiritual information, let's say.
Exactly.
Okay.
I had the experience, but it kept me then really want to search for the truth of reality. I wanted to know the details. But
Yeah.
I had really the main thing that I was searching for. Is there a God? But now I wanted a spiritual insight into more about God, a loving Heavenly
Yeah.
Father. And I didn't have the details because I was relying solely on my spiritual experience, which was what was solid and right on. So I kept searching at 22 for more information to not validate, but to build up on the spiritual experience I had.
So let's stop right there, because I mean, this is a really interesting story, I think. And before you tell us how that that path, or that journey continued from that, let's just talk a little bit on how what happened when you were a kid. And this is interesting, especially at such a young age, to be able to recognize or to understand that what's happening is not right, and that presentation was to my understanding, how you described it, was just going against your nature, what was being presented, and how you were rejecting, and that's how you said that there's no God, so what was
I didn't say there's
and
no God. I just said I couldn't believe in God.
yeah, correct, you
To me,
couldn't
there was a
believe
big
in.
difference. I was never so bold or arrogant
Yeah.
or whatever. So I just agnostic, I guess you could say.
Correct, correct. So I'm wondering, because there's some children, that have this from a very young age. You have this spiritual, let's say, connection or insight. So in your case, I'm wondering, what was it that got you to be so against, or that be so abhorrent to you? I don't know what was the
Yeah.
situation.
Excellent question, Santiago. And of course, I think about it myself quite a bit. But I'm thinking, 5 years old, I reject the what I'm being exposed to, evolutionary from those days in the 50s with the uh, uh, hell and damnation and
Yeah,
just the
yeah.
negative stuff that would scare me. But for some reason, I had this inner spirit, this inner peace. So that's what kept me going all the time until I had my spiritual experience. But I had nothing to attach to identify my inner peace with anything else, because I didn't know if there was a God or not. But that peace, I knew that I had that, and I knew I was not going to let go of that, because that I thought to myself, why can't everyone have this peace that passes all understanding?
And that's beautiful, because I mean, you weren't in you weren't dependent on somebody external, some authority to tell you and to teach you. So what happened in this time, from that moment to when you started your spiritual journey, or your spiritual quest? Did you have like a spiritual, or like a Christian structure, or what was because I imagine you would have had all that structure.
Well, my personal approach. I knew I had the inner peace, which to me was the
Mm-hmm.
most important thing for me at that time. And I knew that was solid. But there was a void there. There was a spiritual void. I didn't know if there was a God or not. So I had this thirst, thirsty for truth, thirsty to.
Okay.
So that kept driving me, it kept me with a curiosity. So anytime I met anyone that had whatever religion or spiritual experiences they had, I was curious about it. But it took me until I had that void until I was 22 years old to actually know for myself, for my own
Got
experience,
it.
to be able to finally have that spiritual birthday, spiritual transformation.
That's it. That's interesting. And let me just throw this story because I have and I always mention this. I have a similar story that I mean I was raised Catholic and yeah, and I got to a point, although it did give me some structure and the understanding of God. There were many things, especially the dogmas and the authority and the fear. Let's say, and you're probably commenting on it or that you're mentioning similar to that, but that never made case of it. I don't know. It was like something that I just kind of just disregarded it. Didn't although I understood it, but never really made an impact on me. So maybe we had something that was beyond taking us beyond those structures and those limits. I don't know.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I uh, I enjoyed listening to born again Christians, the Buddhism, the different evolutionary religions, and as Jesus would say, I think that they all have truth. There's truths in all the religions,
Yeah,
and to the extent that it brings an individual closer to God and God closer to that individual, then to that extent it's worthwhile. But I
yeah,
could not, out of all my searching until I was 22. Or no, at 22 is when I had my spiritual transformation. So from there until 28, those 6 years I was searching, I could not identify with anything that I could relate to wholeheartedly, 100%, that I can say, okay, my personal spiritual experience identifies as and consistent with what I ran across. And of course, that gets me to the Urantia book when I was 28.
you were like a spiritual vagabond, let's say, taking going here and there and taking little bits of everywhere, but not a home yet. Let's say.
There you go. Yeah, I wasn't
Okay.
giving, I wanted the full answer. I mean, if there's a God, I want details if I can find them. And I could not find any source that was brought to my attention or I found on my own from my spiritual experience, because I had that gift finally for myself to be able to make decisions. I can say, oh, that's cool. And I go, ooh,
Okay. Yeah.
can't quite buy into,
Discernment.
that it's not consistent with my understanding of
Uh,
my spiritual growth.
so what happened now that you said you had this journey and you started looking and you got to this point and what happens afterwards?
Oh, this is really cool. Yeah. Never get tired of sharing it. P- individuals like you and I and other students in the Urantia community, one of the first questions out of our mouth, how'd you find the book? What was your experience?
Yeah.
So people love, and I'm so glad you're having this podcast, and along with others that are doing it now and who are computer literate. And as you know me, I need help. And so we're cooking with propane now with this. We're growing spiritually big time compared
Yeah.
to back in the 50 years ago. But what happened for me, Santiago, in my search to wanting if there's more out there, and I was able to, I felt comfortable taking on anything. Well, oh, you're into this, you're into Edgar Casey, whatever they were into. Let me take a look at it, and I'd go, ugh, and then I would not embrace it wholeheartedly. I'd see the truths in
Mm-hmm.
all the religions, but nothing I could accept wholeheartedly. So here's the big story for me. So 22, then after the Marines, had that spiritual transformation, a birthday in Chicago, and then I've been working overseas. I'm a gypsy at heart. I found positions in the Marshall Islands. This is before the State Department, in the Northwest
Okay.
Territories in Canada and things like that. So I'm meeting people around the world, and I'm asking, searching, still wanting more. I want more information spiritually that I can accept wholeheartedly. So I'm on Kwajalein, the Marshall Islands, between Hawaii and Guam. I leave Kwaj, and I settle in Hawaii.
Okay.
And after about a week or so, a friend of mine, he's in the snail mail days, he writes me a letter and he says, JJ, and he mentions the Urantia book in the first or second paragraph. And I'm thinking, what the heck is Urantia, and because he was a geek, he was a computer kind of guy, and the only thing I could think of Urantia, maybe it's some computer magazine that and I'm thinking to myself, why does Bill Ibera want to mention some computer thing to me when he knows I'm not interested in stuff like that? But here's an unusual thing that happened to me. When I saw the word Urantia, my hand reached over to pick up the phone to find the Urantia book. And I'm thinking to myself, what the heck's going on? But the urge was so powerful, I didn't resist it. But I'm thinking, this is not me. So I picked it up.
It was like an involuntary reflex thing.
Sort of, yeah. It's you're familiar with the corporeal staff, that they got the human side got directed to go. I've always wondered how they do that. But anyway, for me in Hawaii, as I'm picking up the phone and I'm thinking all along, like you say, if this reflex thing, I knew it wasn't just let me check this out. It was too powerful. So I didn't resist it, not knowing this is what the outcome would be. So anyway, I called the bookstores, and the Honolulu bookstore downtown had a copy of the Urantia book. So I run down there when I got off my business that I was starting, and it was like, I don't know, 20-some. They didn't have soft copies back in those days. They had the hard copy. Of course, I didn't have the money to pay for it, so I charged it on my charge card, $20-some or whatever it was. So that started my next journey. Spiritual transformation, 22, searching, and finally found something, the Urantia book, of course, the Urantia Revelation, that is consistent with what I know to be true from my personal experience.
Okay. So this is interesting. In the whole point of this podcast is the long way home and finding this and how this process. So before we move into what you found and what is the purpose, I mean the takeaway in all this, can you summarize or any takeaway that you or not takeaway, but anything that you want to mention before we move in this journey? Let's talk about your journey that you want to point out, and especially for someone that's here listening for the first time and that's probably the same thing as you. They hear something and that resonates, that doesn't. There's truth in here and there's none, but does not embrace a religion, because that's important. You do not have to embrace a religion per se, which is what happened to you. So what can you tell to somebody in that sense that they're searching and they haven't found, that information or that maybe experience that you're talking about?
That's an excellent segue to Santiago. So basically, when I finally settled down with the Urantia book and noticed it wasn't a computer thing, it was so voluminous, as you know, 2,097-page letter from God, not knowing that yet. So this voluminous Urantia book, when I get back to my apartment in downtown Honolulu, I see how thick it. I think, well, based upon everything else that's been brought to my attention these last 6 years, I didn't make a final decision, of course. I hadn't opened the book yet. But I thought it's going to be like anything else. I'll find little bits and gems in there that I'll appreciate, but I'm not going to spend my whole time devouring over 2,000 pages. That was my initial thinking. But I did not.
I think everybody comes up to it as a skeptic.
Exactly. Honest, doubting Thomas, but sincere.
Yes.
And, but I had my spiritual experience, so I had something to draw upon. So I knew, I just assumed that it's probably going to be like all the other sources the last 6 years, that it's something I'm not going to wholeheartedly embrace, but I didn't know that. And fortunately, I started from the forward, and that's my story, and I got more detail.
That's a good way good part to stop, because that's interesting. And I started from the forward as myself as well. So we're gonna go dive deep into what you found. So stick around, and we'll find more. On the Divine Within podcast, we'll share real conversations to help you find a personal connection with God. My goal is to support your faith, growth, and journey toward discovering the divine within yourself. Join us to deepen your faith and spiritual journey.